Is the Mustang Shelby GT350 canceled? We are going to look at this possibility and we are going to analyze this leak and see how accurate it really is. I contacted Ford to get a statement from them. We're going to get to that. And we're also going to look at why the Voodo engine, the 5.2 liter cross-plane crank, sounds so amazing. So to figure out how accurate this leak is, first we need to look at the different engine choices available in the Ford Mustang right now. We got the 2.3 liter EcoBoost, we have the 5 liter Coyote engine, we've got the 5.2 liter the Voodo engine, that is the car that we're talking about right now, it's the flat plane crank, and then we have the GT500, of course, which has the Predator engine, that's also 5.2 liters, it's supercharged, makes 760 horsepower, that is pretty much at the top of the heap right now. So for this story, I was referring to Mustang6G.com. It's also been reported on sites like Motor One, and on Mustang6G.com, you should go check them out. There's a user, Jay Gillis, and he says the Mach 1 is confirmed for 2021. I've reported on that before. I'll put a link right up here to that video. Now this user claims that this is a Ford internal document. We're going to look at that in a minute and just see how accurate his claims might be. Now the sales figures of the Mustang is actually part of this picture. If we look at carsalesbase.com, they track and report car sales that are reported by the manufacturer. So in 2019, the Mustang sold about 72,000 units, and the year before in 2018, about 75,000. Now going back to 2016, they sold 105,000. So that was kind of a high year in recent history for the Mustang. Now I reached out to Ford to see what the individual sales of the GT350 and the GT350R trim package are, but Ford doesn't actually release those numbers publicly. So I went to MustangFanClub.com. You should definitely go check them out. It's run by a guy called Jaron Cole, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, and he's got the sales figures actually of the GT350 over the last couple of years. And here's how he did it. If you purchase a Shelby GT350 or 350R, you can go to a Ford website, the Ford Performance website, and get a certificate of authenticity. So Ford will sell this to you, I think it's about $70 or something like that. So he compiled the numbers on the 350 and the R versions from launch. So in 2015, they sold about 137, 2016, 61, 69, in 2017, a little over 7,100, in 2018, 4378. We don't have the numbers for 2019 yet because they're just not available, but I'm just gonna guess 3,500 units. So that's a total of about 21,300 units, something like that. Now, if we look at the entire sales figures for the Mustang, all the models from 2015 to 2019, they sold about 458,000 roughly. So this 21,000 is, let's call it about 5% of the sales, something like that. So these numbers are important. They're part of my theory about how this leak is accurate or not. We're going to get to that in just a minute. And by the way, if you are enjoying this content, please go ahead and subscribe, give this video a like, and if you want to chat with me, and if you got a tip, hit me up on Instagram. So this is also part of the story and part of my theory about this leak. So right now, the Ford production lines are actually shut down. They don't have a restart date, and they say they're working on new safety procedures, getting them in place in light of this current health situation that we're in. I'm not going to mention it by name, but you know what I'm talking about. Ford has started or is starting production of ventilators, so is GM. FCA has started ventilator production in Italy, so these are the times that we're in. Personally, I want to thank all these manufacturers for making these ventilators. It's kind of like the Second World War, I guess, where these manufacturers, they used to make airplane parts, airplanes, now they're making ventilators. So this is where we are right now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. So let's look at this allegedly leaked spec sheet here. What we've got is the Mustang models going from the GT and the convertible, the inline 4 convertible, the i4 convertible, the Mach 1 coupe, and the Shelby GT3 and the Shelby GT500 coupe. So what's missing here is the GT350 and the GT350R, conspicuously absent. Let's look at the engine part of this. This is the VIN decoder sheet, by the way. I'm not an expert at decoding Ford VINs. If anybody is out there, please let me know if you think this is accurate or not. So we've got the 5-liter V8 at the top, and all these are horsepower TBD. We've got the 2.3-liter EcoBoost. We got a 5-liter 4-valve. We've got the 2.3-liter, another EcoBoost version, and then the 5.2-liter. So the 5.2-liter is on this list. It doesn't say if it's supercharged or not. We know that the GT350 has a 5.2-liter, the Voodo engine, the cross-plane crank, and if the GT350 was going to be available for 2021, we'd expect to see a second 5.2-liter on this list, but we don't. The Predator, the engine in the GT500, is the 5.2-liter block, but it is a traditional cross-plane crank, so they're using it a bit differently. And I did a video on why the cross-plane crank engine sounds so incredible. It really does. I'll link it up here. I might actually include part of that video in here too, just depending on how long this is. So the crankshaft is in the bottom of the engine, and the pistons are connected to the crankshaft. The part of the crankshaft that they are connected to are called the crank pins. I've got this diagram up on screen right now. The crank pins are in blue in this diagram right now, and so this is a cross-plane crank, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but a cross-plane crank is the kind of engine that is the LT1, the LS series, the Ford Coyote, like pretty much every modern American V8, except for one, is a cross-plane crank. So that one exception is the engine in the Ford Mustang GT350. It's called the Voodo engine, and it is a flat plane crank. So why is it called flat plane crank? Well, it's because the crank pins are 180 degrees across from each other. So this is what the GT350 crankshaft looks like. It's 5.2 liters and it makes 526 horsepower at 8250 RPM. That's way higher than an LS or an LT engine revs out to. So here's why it's called flat plane crank. Here's the profile of the crankshaft. If you look at it end on, you can see it's vertical because all of the crank pins are in one plane. They're aligned 180 degrees across from each other, so they're all in one plane. So that's why it's called a flat plane crank. There's only one plane, and that plane is flat. Here's what it looks like when it's rotating. So what is the effect of the firing order from a flat plane crank engine? So you get an explosion on one bank and then the others. So it goes left, right, left, right, left, right. That's basically the firing order. In a cross plane crank, the firing order is different. So it gives it a very, very unique sound. And there's another benefit to a flat plane crankshaft is that you don't need such big, heavy counterweights like you do with a cross plane crank. The engine is inherently a little bit more balanced because of the firing order. It does have some other deficiencies, and we're going to get to that in a second. There's always a compromise with different engine designs. But because it is lighter, you don't need such heavy counterweights. It's going to be able to rev more quickly, up and down. You can change RPMs much more quickly. So because this crankshaft doesn't need such big counterweights, it's able to rev much faster. You're able to rev up and down much faster, and you're able to rev to a higher RPM, typically 2, although that has more to do with the valve train than the crankshaft, but it's the ability to rev up and down quickly that makes the flat plane crank pretty unique. Here's another image of the flat plane crank on the GT350. You can see the counterweights are all in one plane. Because the exhaust pulses are on opposite sides of the engine, that makes for more efficient gas scavenging. When you combust the fuel, the exhaust is able to get out more efficiently because of this design. Now, most 4-cylinder engines are actually flat plane crank. Here's an animation of a 4-cylinder engine doing its thing. Now, one of the big downsides of a flat plane crank design is vibration, and that is one of the reasons why the Italian cars and the European cars like Ferrari and so forth tend to have smaller engines, is because when you get the engine up to a larger size, the vibration becomes more of an issue, and it's a little bit complicated, but that's basically one of the major downsides of a flat plane crank. So a cross plane crank engine, why is it called a cross plane crank? Well, as you can imagine, we've already looked at the flat plane crank, and we looked at it head on, and we got one plane. In a cross plane crank, like a Chevy V8, you've got a cross. And so what you've got is you've got crank pins that are aligned 90 degrees from each other, not 180 degrees. And this has an effect, of course, on the firing order. So for example, a firing order that might be typical in a cross-plane crank might be right, left, left, right, left, right, right, left. Remember, the flat plane crank is left, right, left, right, left, right the whole time. Let's look at these two profiles side by side. This is from a Jalopnik article a couple years ago. So you can see on the right-hand side, the flat plane crank, it has the cylinders 1458 on one side and 2367 on the other side. So because the firing order is not left, right, you need to add some counterbalance weights on the crankshaft to take into account that you've got two sequential explosions on the same bank, and you need to balance that out. And so the effect of having these counterweights on the crankshaft is that it is heavier, and the engine is going to tend to rev up and rev down a little bit more slowly. So here's an animation of a cross-plane crank V8, and of course this unique firing order tends to give it that really distinctive rumble that we all know and love from a V8. So let's get to the theories, and I'm going to tell you what I think, how accurate this leak is. So first of all, this leaked document was posted on April 1st. Happy April Fool's Day, I guess. That's the first theory. So I don't know about that. Now another user called Sigma6, he's got a theory that this is a planter leak from Ford, and that this is designed basically just to keep the whole Mustang community engaged and talking about the Mustang. Possibility. Now, of course, going back to the production line issue where vehicles are actually, the production has been halted right now, we know that the GT350 and the R make up just about 5% of the entire Mustang production or the sales numbers. So perhaps Ford is putting the GT350 and the R on hiatus for a year because they're just not making cars right now. Another theory is that Ford put out this leak to see who was going to leak it and find out who the leaker is. It's another possibility. Companies put out fake leaks sometimes to do that, to kind of track the internal leakers. Now, another possibility is that the Mach 1 is actually slated for 2021 and it is returning. I think that is a pretty good possibility. It might have some version of the Performance Pack 1 and parts from the Performance Pack 2 package. Right now, you know, the Bullet Mustang is only 480 horsepower. It's just 20 more than the GT. Not a big mechanical difference between the GT and that, but the price difference is quite a bit. If they bring out the Mach 1, is it possible that they might take the Voodo engine and put that into the Mach 1 and make that sort of part of the unique Mach 1 brand? I don't know. You know, the Mach 1 is a pretty big step up from the GT. If we get rid of the GT350, it's a big step up from the GT to the GT500. So does Ford want to fill that in, or do they want to pare down the Shelby line? Here's another important thing. Ford just updated the GT350R for 2020. They also introduced the Heritage Edition 2. So why cancel it now? Ford has got all these tooling costs. They're already sunk costs. They don't really need to spend any more additional money to develop the car. So it doesn't really make sense to cancel it right now. So Ford Authority says their source, who they're not naming, and it seems kind of vague a little bit on Ford Authority, but their information is usually pretty good. They say that the car is going to be discontinued. So I reached out to Ford for a comment, and here's the response that I got. While we cannot comment on future product plans, we've been pushing the Mustang lineup's capabilities and levels of excitement to new heights to give us the most performance-focused Mustang lineup in its 55-year history. This includes performance upgrades we've announced over the last 12 months to the Mustang Shelby GT350 and GT350R models. Furthermore, we've introduced a new Shelby GT350 and GT350R Heritage Edition package right before Christmas, really bringing out the best of this naturally aspirated, manual-only fastback. So that's not really a confirmation or denial by any means. They don't comment on future product plans. Now, the GT350 is not a future product, it's a current product, and they haven't confirmed that it's going to be available for 2021. So that's what Ford says. Let me know down below in the comments if you think it's going to be discontinued or it's going to continue. Now, if there is a future Mach 1, which seems like a good possibility, or a GT350, a guy called Modern Muscle Ace on Instagram did this really cool render of a new front end. It's up on screen right now. Thank you for that. Go check him out on Instagram. Here's my take. Tooling is already in place. It's not a huge selling car, but it does have a higher profit margin. It seems kind of hard to cancel right now, but hey, we live in pretty strange times. I've got these t-shirts that are going to be available in my online shop. I'm going to be opening up next week. If you'd like to support the channel, I'm going to announce that on Instagram. It would be awesome if you want to come and support the channel. There's 2 videos up on screen right now. My name is Eric. Go ahead and pick one. I will see you in the next video.